We're in a society now, particularly in Australia, where we focus a lot on results. We see that students at NAPLAN results, and a lot of our students are completing their final years of education as well, and it all comes down to a particular number. And somehow we can be confused to think that that one number or that score is the value of who we are as individuals, the value of what we will contribute to society in the future. So I want to talk about connection today with regard to the idea of relationship and the power of relationship between individuals, communities, and the individuals in them. Let me start by asking you a question to reflect on. Do you think it's important that students are happy, well-adjusted, connected to their schools? Is it important that a student wants to go to school in the morning? And I would say to you that it is really important, and the studies are starting to show that a student who feels that they're going to school, which is a community of people who likes them, who accepts them, who values them, go to that school more regularly. They go to that school with a better sense of self, that their ideas and their values about where they will end up in the future are much higher. And finally, that their results are far better, because the way that they see themselves, the way that they feel that others see them, is so critically important that it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy in that young person's life. This type of research is now coming to the fore, and a group that I really like and I recommend is the group called the Relational Schools Foundation. Since 2014, Dr. Rob Lowe has been looking at the impact of relationship on young people. He has gone through all of the UK doing surveys and interviews of young people to say and to look at how do they feel versus how they see themselves or achieve as individuals. He found 5 different components in terms of how a young person views themselves or how a school is set up. And his research shows that there are 5 elements of a school that will help them to improve the sense of well-being for an individual and develop community. The first one is around power. And in a sense is that for young people and for schools to thrive and be good places to belong, is that power something that is distributed fairly? As an individual, is power distributed in a sense where I feel respected and I can respect others? The second one there is around the information. When I'm in this school environment, do I feel I receive the information, the feedback that I require to be successful in that community? The third element is communication. Are there times where I can communicate to speak to others and times where I can be heard as well? And does the school value that? Do my classes, do my colleagues value that ability to be able to communicate with each other? The fourth element is around purpose. Why are we here? What are we doing together? What is the direction that we're headed? Is there a synergy in the types of things that we're doing together that we're actually building towards the same destination? And finally, when I reflect back on my story and I look back over all of the time that I've spent in that school and community, is that story building and showing me and telling me a set of patterns and trends that show me overcoming difficulties, working with relationship with others in terms of being able to go forward towards my desired destination? Because if I've got a story that when I retell it from the past is one of overcoming, one of dealing with difficulties and struggles, I'm most likely to think that my future is one that's going to be positive, that yes, it will have difficulties and struggles in the future. But because I know my story and I know where I've overcome that in the past, I'm more likely to see that my future story is going to be one that's positive also. In looking at a school then, the Relational Schools Foundation and Dr. Lowe's research started to look at schools then as being not just permanent entities, not something that was fixed in stone, but almost like a mixing desk, that we can look at those 5 elements within a school and start adjusting and working with those. In a school that doesn't communicate very often or doesn't have spaces for students to communicate, they can provide opportunities for them to communicate and interact and to speak, to know and to be known. And so in our mixing desk, we can actually then increase that proximity in terms of being able to provide opportunities for that. So if we were to evaluate our school and think that our students don't have the opportunity to communicate with staff or each other, then we can provide those opportunities, and so doing, lift that scale in terms of the community. As he went around, he decided then to have a look at each of the schools and work out throughout the United Kingdom which schools were doing this really well. And so the question for many people is, how do you actually measure a relationship? How do you measure the connections that are occurring within a school? What he was looking for was relational proximity. how much do we know or connect or interrelate to each other? And that was the basis upon which he was valuing or understanding the level of that connection. And it's an interesting tool where he was asking was, he paired people up in terms of the classrooms from all individual classes, gave them somebody within that class to think about. Maybe somebody they knew well, maybe somebody who was brand new to the school, maybe somebody they'd known since they'd commenced even in prep or grade 1. And asked them questions about how well they knew this individual, what this person's values were, what they liked or disliked, how well did they know these things? Did they know what this person's aspirations were like? They were asking them to make a decision around, was their relationship in the past a good one, or was it a stressed one? Now, was it a good one or a difficult one? And then in the future, in 10 or 15 years' time, did they expect to know the individual that they had been paired with randomly within that school group? And from that, he was able to judge how close or distant relationships were within that school. Now, that's not valuing the relationship. It's talking about a proximity. How close am I to understanding that person, to realising what their needs and wants are, understanding their values or projecting where they want to head in the future? And it gave him a huge amount of data. And the data looked like this. So those 5 domains I spoke about first off were divided then into 35 individual elements. So for each one of those 5, 7 subsets of questions could be asked. And going across each of those little wriggly lines that appear on the screens are different schools. And putting all the students' results together so that it was totally anonymous, and hundreds of children within the schools put their results together, and then to be able to evaluate where they were doing well or where they were struggling. This allowed him to develop a baseline to say, in an average school, how close should those connections be? How well should students know each other? How well should they have an understanding of their future aspirations of the students that they travelled with? The findings were very interesting. So in total, 3 of the findings that came out of his study were that girls actually had better relationships in general. And so he gave it about a 75% ranking. Came down to the fact that the girls actually spoke a great deal more, and when you looked at the amount of time that they communicated with each other in meaningful ways, that they were spending a lot more time communicating. In boys, they spent less time actually interacting and communicating. They may have spent time together, undertook activities, played sport, spent time in spatial proximity to each other, but in terms of communicating, being understood and understanding the other, that was reduced. But the fascinating part of this research was that all of these schools were co-educational and that they had boys and girls right the way through. And what the study found was that in terms of understanding the other within school environments, it was the male and female relationship that was the most disconnected. And on his results, it was about 32%. And when the researchers went in and dug a little bit deeper, the reason that was the case was the fact that the only way that male-female relationships were framed were around concepts of dating and marriage. So for a boy and a girl in a school to communicate with each other, the destination was either dating or somehow marriage. And so in that sense, schools had not set up the relationships or the behaviours or the expectations that boys and girls could actually be friends. And so accordingly, they didn't interact with each other, even though they sat next to each other in class, may have gone through school for 13, 15 years together. Their understanding was still very limited. It's interesting because when we talk about private schools and we talk about single-sex schools, a boys' school or a girls' school, often the greatest complaint about them is if you send your child to a boys' school or a girls' school, they won't learn how to actually interact with the opposite sex. So here are people spending 13 years together and they're still not learning about that. One would think that if we were able to teach that and develop that in schools, how different would marriages actually be if people came out with even just the 75% between female and female as demonstrated there, how much different impact that would have. When you look at those results, there's one school that really stood out, and this was a school that actually surprised the researchers in their results, and it was called the Samuel Ward School. And you can see it there and doing some of the comparisons. Have a look at the first element that was there, and that was the amount of time that students were allowed or given opportunity to interact and connect with each other. Compare that to another school that's there in terms of just how different one element is, how often students have time to talk and interact, communicate and get to know each other. That's not a $1 million activity. That doesn't require a new facility. It doesn't require employing new staff. simply being focused on the fact of whether or not you were giving opportunity for students to communicate had that profound impact. If you go all the way through, that same school, the Samuel Ward School, was exceptional all the way across. And you can see how far it was ahead all of the other schools in the United Kingdom. Now, they were fascinated by that school and they wanted to know what was different about this school compared to all the other schools that they had reviewed. And they were wanting to know whether a wealthy school, was it a school that was brand new, was it a school that was in a really old area and all the families knew each other, etc. And when they looked at the Samuel Ward School, what they actually found was that it was actually a school that was in quite a challenging area, a school that was from low economic background, and that the projection in terms of students' academic ability was quite low as well. But in terms of what the school had set up besides that community, or in spite of that community, was a school that was focused on culture of community, a school that was focused on relationship at all parts of how the school was developed. From the very start of the school and through all parts of its DNA, they wanted to develop a school that was built upon connection and provide opportunities for people to get to know each other and to be known. The results are that even the students who were the most challenged did well. So students who were good students already improved beyond what was expected, but the students who were the most marginalised, the most at risk of failure or dropping out, results increased exponentially. And what they found out that one of the key factors was that all students had a high level of literacy and communication. And in doing so, they were able to connect with others because they were able to understand and communicate, be communicated to, but they were also able to express and communicate to others things that were important about them, things that they were worried about, destinations and pursuits that were important to them as well. And because of that, they had a good sense of belonging, and that good sense of belonging ensured that their academics increased remarkably. But we're in Australia. We're not the UK, we're not the Samuel Ward School. And so our question was to say, what is the transferability of these studies? So it's great that the Relational Schools Foundation did these studies in the UK with government schools. How would that come across into the Australian environment? And so we invited Dr. Rob Lowe to come out and actually speak to our schools. And part of that, we thought, wouldn't it be interesting if he brought his research tool with him? And our view has been, as a group of Christian schools and heading up those schools, 140 of them, we've always put forward that schools that shared the same ethos and values, and ours was a Christian set of ethos and values, that our view was that relationship was central to what we did, that we were communities of people coming together and rallying around that there should be some kind of profound impact. If relationship was central and his study said that should make an impact, then our schools who are set up to do that, shouldn't there be some kind of correlation that was there? So we then took his findings and his research, and remember, I'm going to take you back, that's the Samuel Ward School's results. Take away everybody else, that's Samuel Ward. And when he came out to Australia, we asked Dr. Rob Lowe, we said, here's one of our schools at random that we're selecting for you. We would like you to take that research tool and all of that data and apply it to one of our Christian schools. And this was the result. The schools had nearly the identical results. Two schools on opposite side of the world, one's a government school, one's a Christian school. The thing that they have in common is their focus on connection, community, and relationship. And that's really profound. We're still yet to work out the statistical percentage of that, of how close that is in terms of 35 different points, and on that scale, just how close those results are. But isn't it amazing with two schools from very different backgrounds who focus on connection and relationship and the value of individuals, the impact that it has on the results that were there? Now, the question may be, well, where to from here? You've got one school and you've compared it to the rest, and I would agree with you. Any person who's involved with statistics or research would say that could have been a fluke. I agree with you. Having two schools that match up. But it does say to us, is there something here that we should be investigating? And to that end, we've just commissioned research over 20 Christian schools involving 8,000 students to find out whether or not when a community comes together, where they share the same ethos and values, where the whole focus upon relationship of about valuing and caring for individuals, does this hold true across an entire movement? And so those results have gone out, and I'm pleased to say that not only do we have about 8,000 participants, we have about close to 11,000 people who are now participating. Further than that, I want to take it one step further. So it would be good to say people gathered around the same ethos, the same value of connection would achieve these results. But two communities don't look the same. And in that part of our group, we realised that we've got some very different communities. So we said, what if we did then a case study of some of the more unique communities and thought, how does relationship or connection change with them? So one of them we've decided to do a specific case study on is an Indigenous community. How does an Indigenous school develop a relationship, have a sense of community and its values? We're looking at a multicultural community. We're looking at a very small community. We're looking at a rural community. And we're looking at a community that deals with the marginalised as well. And we want to know, does the power of connection, of having a shared set of values and a shared ethos, overcome all differences and still have that positive impact upon students? What are we hoping to find from that? I believe that we will find differences in our school. Yes, it's lovely to think that every one of the 140 schools in Christian Schools Australia would achieve the same as Samuel Ward. But what I think we will find is that there will be schools that will have slight differences. And when we look at that little mixing desk, there'll be some schools that do communication extremely well. There'll be other schools that students know their story and they score very highly, and others where it's not the case. And our hope is then to have a look at the schools that are doing extremely well and to take those little pieces of information, those little ideas or activities that they've got in their schools and start applying it to those schools that are struggling in those areas. Because for the first time we can say we value relationship, we know the connection has an impact, but we'll also know how you do it as well. And whether we get ideas from an Indigenous community, a rural community, a little school or a city school, the ideas and the ways in which they build connection and community will be important. And at the end of all of this, my hope is this, is that wherever a student goes to school, then rather than just focusing on NAPLAN results or their final OP score or senior certificate result, that they'll actually realise that just as important, maybe even more important, are the connections they made with their fellow students, the connections they made with their teachers, the connections they made with the school. That they will realise that those connections give them an idea about who they are. And when they know who they are, when they know that they belong and have value, when they realise as well that they have a future that they can actually participate in and influence, that a student will have a greater sense of satisfaction in going to those schools, and schools will know how to facilitate that. And so my hope that is in a year's time when all those results come back in, that we'll have a few clues to be able to get students to connect better with each other and their schools. Thank you.